we're on our second last masterclass. So I've given you a lot of information over the last 4 weeks, 5 including today. So I hope that it hasn't been too overwhelming for you. Sorry, I just need to let these guys in. Today we're looking at a really important topic, and I'm sure that you would be familiar with those of you that are dependent on other volunteers and a team to actually run your event. We're looking at succession planning and event teams. So today the conversation is all about how do we actually have or establish a really good event team so that we can share the load? How do we recruit new people? How do we retain those people? And I'm also going to talk to you a bit about a structure around how to do that. And then we're going to finish up next week with a session that will be very relevant, and that is events in a COVID world. So if there's anything you would like to talk about specifically around COVID and the impact on events, please don't hesitate to reach out beforehand, and I'll make sure that I cover that in next week's session. Now, as always, same process. This is being recorded, so if at any point you need to duck out or out and back in, there's no drama at all. I like to keep these as pretty casual and flexible as possible. The other thing is, don't forget about the chat box. So drop any items in there. If you've got any questions or discussion points you want me to raise when I've got a moment to pause, then please pop it in there. And always, if you want to discuss something in more detail, just unmute yourself and just stop me at any time if there's something really important that you would like to discuss. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because it looks like a couple of people are having trouble getting in. And I just need to fix that up. All right, that's better. Okay, I can see you're in now, Sheila, Sophie. Okay, cool. Just looked like you guys, it kept coming up a few times, so something was going a bit crazy there. All right, so same process. As I said, anyone needs to pop out, please do. We'll keep it as casual as necessary. And it really is important that you ask any questions that do come to mind. You guys know who I am. I've got familiar faces with me today, so I don't need to introduce myself again. Now, this is just an opportunity. If anybody has any questions, as I said, we've covered a lot over the last 5 weeks. If anyone has any specific questions about any of our previous sessions, or if you've got anything that you'd like to share, perhaps something you've implemented or a learning that you've taken away from a session, I would love to give you the opportunity to share that. Okay, so as I've said today, we're talking all about event teams. We're talking about volunteers, we're talking about retention, we're talking about motivation, we're talking about structure. We can't deliver our events without our team. Majority of us are working with volunteers. Some people are fortunate enough to have paid staff, but all events require a certain level of volunteers in order to be able to deliver their event. The number one challenge that close to every regional event I speak to is having is volunteer retention and also attraction. So how do we attract new volunteers? How do we attract younger volunteers? How do we retain our existing volunteers? Because it's really hard, isn't it, this whole thing about succession planning when you've got a really good volunteer that's been with you for a few years and then all of a sudden you lose them. It leaves a big gap in the event. And I've even seen instances like that where the loss of one particular influential person can actually have a severe impact on the success of the event. So we need to try to get rid of that. We need to make sure that your events are structured in a way that they can easily evolve with any turnover of volunteers or staff. So a lot of these events that I talk to have concerns like volunteer burnout, the inability to attract younger volunteer base, and also this growing workload. And now we've got COVID on top of it. And that's adding extra pressure on events as well. So these are all common concerns. The way I like to address it is what I'm going to share with you today, which is all about how you're managing your team and your workload. So it's about how do you make it easier and how do you make your event attractive to potential new volunteers. And I'm not suggesting that having more volunteers won't be useful, but sometimes less volunteers and a more efficient operating system is much easier for you to manage. So as you can see on the screen, these are some of the things we're going to cover today. Now, back in 2019, I did a survey amongst regional events across Australia. Over 85% agreed with this particular statement. And many of them commented that they depend on volunteers. So this whole conversation is critical to the success of events, no matter how big or small your event may be. Now, I want to hear from you. Who's prepared to share their current situation with volunteers or their team? I'm just going to check here. Desley's having a bit of trouble.
Linda, apologies. I'm transferring from my phone to computer. So I will need to be logged in on both. I just thought I'd explain. My computer's camera's not working at the moment, but I will be on the phone for audio and visual, and I'll be looking at your screen. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Look at you, you multitasker. That's fine.
I don't do it very well, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just let me know if you have any dramas.
Okay.
So who wants to share? Do you struggle to retain volunteers for more than 1 year? What's your situation with volunteers? What's your, I often hear from events, they say it's a bit easier to actually get people to commit to volunteer on the event day. So people will come and give a few hours and help on the gate or, setting up, whatever it may be. But it's that planning stage that's really hard.
With the St George show, we've had a lot of older and people that have been in place for a while. In the last couple of years, we've attracted a couple of new volunteers, but we're struggling with our key position places to keep them filled. It's like we need training in what those roles are, a bit more definition on the roles maybe. But yeah, it usually comes together because people come in on the day and help, but yeah.
But do you find that it's left to just a small few to actually do that planning work?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a common scenario. So what you've just mentioned, Susie, around, defining those roles a bit and getting clear on that is exactly what we're going to talk about today, because you're absolutely right. You can't recruit the people you need unless you have clearly articulated what it is you need.
Yeah.
And that's often the point that a lot of events miss is they're and no disrespect at all, because majority of people are volunteers themselves trying to recruit other volunteers. So I totally get that, it's often just this last minute, we need some volunteers to do this, this and this.
Yeah.
They often don't take the time or have the time to actually sit down and think, I guess, logically about what are those positions that we need to fill. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, which to a lot of events is quite overwhelming. They think, I don't have the time to just sit down and do that. But once it's done, it's such a great asset. And I've seen it work for events. It becomes this really powerful recruitment tool, because instead of just doing generic calls for volunteers, you can be really targeted. And if you need somebody in a particular position, you can actually start to identify people in the community that might have a background in that, or, can get some joy out of that kind of role, which is better for the event overall. Yeah, so people are saying they struggle. Sophie said they struggle in the planning stage for volunteers. Yeah, absolutely, Sheila. It is difficult to find time to volunteer these days because, volunteers today are very different to volunteers 10, 20, 40 years ago. We've got a lot more it just kind of feels like an excuse, you know, we go, oh, we're so busy, we don't have time to volunteer. And I want to address that today as well, because it's an important thing to keep in mind when you are an organisation or an event that's looking for volunteers.
I also think in this day and age, like so many more people work all the time, like most households have 2 people working all the time, where once before there'd be one working and one sort of floated and did a bit of volunteer work as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a different environment now than it was years ago. And that's why we need to think different. And that's why I challenge events to say, well, because a lot of event committees that I've worked with get really frustrated, you know, oh, nobody will volunteer, nobody will help us. Why are we doing this? And I appreciate that. But you're right, Susie, we need to remember the current environment. It's just completely different. So we need to change the way we think about volunteering at our events. All right, thanks for sharing, everyone. Now, what motivates people to volunteer? I'm going to challenge you a bit today to think a bit different about volunteering. I'm hopefully going to get you to think about things you perhaps haven't thought about before when we talk about volunteering. You know, this is all about succession planning, right? So this is, we will not have an event in 3-5 years, 1 year's time if we don't have the volunteers to deliver the events. They're labour intensive. You need humans to deliver events. And unfortunately, we don't often make a lot of money, or we're community driven. So it's not about profit margins. So we don't have the budget to be able to pay people to deliver our events. And that's something to keep in mind, is maybe then that needs to change. And that's another conversation I'm happy to discuss. So as I said, volunteers today are very different to volunteers of years gone by. We need to understand why people volunteer so we can satisfy their needs and expectations, because people do still volunteer, but just in different ways. Often we'll be doing our volunteer commitments at midnight, you know, on the computer, over Skype, talking in Facebook groups, doing desktop research, writing a grant application, whatever it may be. We do volunteer, but in different ways. It's not that traditional way where, you know, if I think about my parents or my grandparents, they would often volunteer to gain social outcomes. It was very much about social outings for them because they didn't work. They were often just at home. So for them, it was their social aspect that motivated them to volunteer. And there's still people that are motivated by that social outing. You know, if there's new people that have come into a community, or perhaps there's some, you know, stay-at-home mums that have really good skills that want to get out and meet new people and engage with other humans, then there's that real motivation to gain that social outcome. People also want to volunteer if they have particular values. So they want to express values that are important to themselves. And Woodford Folk Festival is a really classic example of that. And we're going to talk about that as a case study shortly. But, you know, Woodford has created this, almost this cult, you know, where people align to the values of Woodford Folk Festival and they volunteer because they want to express the importance of those values. People also volunteer because they see it as an opportunity to increase their knowledge or to develop new skills. So it's that whole thing of learning, understanding, skill development, you know, also the opportunity to use some new skills that they may have that they wouldn't otherwise be able to use. People also volunteer because they want to engage in their own self-development. So it could be building self-esteem, recognition, you know, any kind of self-development type activity. Career. So, you know, you often see this with high school students or universities. They actually want to volunteer to gain experiences that will support their career growth and development. As I said, social outcomes are really important to people. And this idea of, you know, volunteering is also, it has such powerful social outcomes in terms of, you know, I've kind of put it under the heading protection, but it's where people feel that they're able to cope with any of their, whether that's anxiety or depression or anything like that, getting out and volunteering and giving back and being part of a community creates this sense of protection for them. And then we also have things at events where people volunteer because they, to have fun, to be around like-minded people. Some people do it if it's an opportunity to be part of a prestigious event. And then you do have some people that want to do it, particularly younger people, those that have never volunteered before, that do it for the tangible outcomes. So they might get a free ticket for the event or something of that nature. So there's a whole range of reasons why people volunteer, and everybody's different. But you need to understand what motivates people to volunteer. And you also need to understand how people volunteer these days. And that's that conversation we were having before. If you think about, say, myself versus my grandparents, we live in a very different world. And why I volunteer and how I volunteer will be very different to my grandparents. So these days I do volunteering. I have to be selective because I do have limited time, but I do volunteering amongst running a business and a family and other things. But I make sure that I'm very selective in what I do volunteering for. So it's got to be connected to outcomes that are important to me and my family. And I find things that I can do that match my skill set that I know I can do easily. So I do things like write grant applications for our school, and I can do that late at night. I don't have to be at meetings or, going to different things, but I still feel like I'm adding some kind of value through volunteering. So understanding what motivates people and also how they can actually deliver some form of volunteering. The other two things that you need to be really mindful of is what I've categorized as what and why. You need to, and we touched on this before, Susie, in your comment, what is it that you need? So you need to define clear roles. And what that does is it makes it easier for people that are interested to see if they have the skills that will match that specific role. People like to know what they're in for. I know myself, I wouldn't put my hand up for a volunteering job without understanding what it actually consists of, what skills do I need, how much time do I need to commit, what are the actual tasks involved. So clearly defining roles is a really powerful way to help recruit people and to be targeted in your recruitment. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. And the second thing is why. You need to understand the value proposition that you're offering to volunteers. So ask yourself, if you're a volunteer, let's just keep using me as an example today. If you want me to volunteer at your event, you need to be able to tell me why I should spend my free time at your event helping out. So you need to make it clear around what the benefits are. So we go back to the motivations. What are the benefits to me? And I know that sounds selfish because it shouldn't always be about I need to get some benefit, but I do, and most people do want to know. So you need to understand what that value proposition is. And it's not necessarily a benefit that gives me some personal gain. It may be a benefit to my community. It may be a benefit to, my kids' sporting club, or, there's different things that we want to support these days. So what and why is really important. So think about that right now. What is your value proposition? Why should somebody spend their free time volunteering at your event? The other thing I want you to think about is how you currently recruit and manage your volunteers. Would you say your recruitment and your management of volunteers is structured, organised, with clearly defined roles? Or would you say it's a little sporadic, or perhaps even manic? You're almost screaming for help. Think about that. What type of volunteer group, if you were the volunteer, put yourself in the other shoes, What type of volunteer group would you prefer to be part of? One that's structured and organised with clearly defined roles, or one that's a little sporadic or even a bit desperate? I've worked with many events in a one-on-one capacity and also in group scenarios. And in my experience, I've seen this whole process work wonders for event committees when they're looking to attract new volunteers and to improve their efficiencies. But it does take a little bit of time, and you will need to invest some time initially to set this structure up. It's all about setting up a structure and checklists so that volunteers have a clear idea of what's expected of them. And it's an opportunity to get them excited as well. You kind of need to sell it. It's a bit of a pitch. It's a bit of a sales pitch. You need to really explain the benefits, explain how fun it will be. You get to meet new people. You know, the roles are suited to your experience and your skills, so it's not going to be too hard for you. You can do it at night. You don't need to come to meetings. So you do need to come up with a sales pitch. So before I explain this structure to you, I want you to have a little think about your event and your team. Just picture it in your head right now. What does your structure look like? Is there a clear structure of your committee? Is it documented? Does everyone on your committee know their primary role within the team? Have a think about that. Because if it's not structured and there are clearly defined roles, then this is something you need to do as soon as we get off this session today. Well, maybe not that. Settle down, Linda. Maybe not as soon as you get off the session today, but it certainly needs to be a priority for you. What you need to think about is operating a bit like a business. So think of it as clearly defined position descriptions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those shortly. Sorry, I think I've just got a lash in my eye. What I want you to try to do is get away from having one, maybe two people doing everything. And that overwhelming feeling of feeling like I just need to do it myself. It's too hard to delegate. Because that's a big red flag for burnout. So in this structure you can see on the screen at the moment, you can play around with this however you like. And I've given you a template that actually has this structure there. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible for you. Essentially, I try to break it into two sections, and I like the macro level at the top, or the executive group, and the micro level, the subcommittee groups. So in that macro or executive level, this is kind of, I guess, the team that work really closely together in those planning stages. So they oversee the strategy, they do the big picture planning, they get together regularly. You know, they're a really tight team that work on the overarching planning of the event. Then they have underneath them a whole heap of subcommittee groups. So it's kind of like, I guess, the operational team. They're the ones that get on with the job and just action, action, action. They're not interested in attending meetings. They're not really interested. I mean, some maybe, that's quite a generalization, my apologies, but generally they're not interested in going to meetings or understanding the broader strategy or the grant applications you're doing. But they want to have ownership over one micro component of the event. And it's good to give them ownership over it. So you see what I'm saying? You have that macro level at the top, and then you have your subcommittee groups. And Susie, I'm picturing the show and going, I can see how that would work for a show. And then what happens is this flows into roles and responsibilities, as I said, I'm going to talk to you about, but basically it then supports your recruitment of new volunteers. This is you getting a clear understanding and appreciation of what you need. What are all of those subcommittee roles for your event. You might only have 3 or 4, you might have double what's on the screen right now, but that's for you to break your event down into bite-sized chunks. And then what I say is with those subcommittee groups, I look at it like a snowflake. So for every element of your event, if I just go back here, all the different elements of your event, you create a subcommittee group. And it is like, you know, you think of an event and it's overwhelming, right? There's so many different elements to an event. But what I always say is you've got to break it down into manageable chunks. That's a very technical term, I know, but you've got to break it down so that it becomes manageable. And then you've got to delegate those different chunks. And each of those different chunks has its own little snowflake. So if, for example, the bar coordinator was one chunk of your event, or the bar, so you're finding a coordinator to actually look after the bar, but then you empower that bar coordinator to create their own little team. So each of those little subcommittee portfolios, if you like, will then have a series of team members that will hang off them. So in this situation with the bar example, you know, the bar coordinator might have, you know, their wife managing the stock, their son managing the setup and pack down, their cousin managing the event day volunteers, you know, their grandmother managing the cash. Because that tends to be what happens, right? We start to rally our friends and family to help us out. So does that make sense? You kind of have, you think of this broader structure, and I'm going to dive deeper into it for you as well, but you have these guys at the top that are working all year on the event, really closely together, meeting regularly, doing all of that macro level planning. Then you have your doers down the bottom here. And for each of those doers, they create their own little snowflake and their own team to do their specific role, and they focus on that role. They have ownership of that role and they do a good job in delivering it. And that's one less thing you have to think about. All right, this, without kind of blowing your head off your shoulders, this is actually the Woodford Folk Festival organisational chart. How crazy is that? So they have a whole philosophy around empowering people to volunteer at their event. So this is their snowflake, if you like. So you can see at the heart, they've got their members, and then it basically goes out and they have directors and they have executive management, then they have area managers, then what do they call them? Department heads and volunteers. So they're breaking it down. You see they're just getting down into smaller chunks. And then they empower those people to deliver their little chunks. And if everyone delivers their little chunk really well, your job is done. I know I make that sound simple, but that's the concept, is break it down into manageable chunks, empower them to do the job, and you just oversee all of that activity and keep it all together at the top. I shouldn't say just, because that's still a big job. It's about delegation and empowerment. A hot tip: if you want to recruit more people, and particularly younger people, and I'm talking more about in that, you know, micro level, the subcommittee, the doers down in that section of your structure, if you want to recruit more of them, don't mention the M word. I really recommend that you do not burn out your subcommittee groups on meetings. First thing you need to do is say, you don't need to come to meetings, and you'll grab their attention straight away. And the unfortunate reason for that is because we did create this culture, particularly with volunteer events, of having to have meetings all the time. And there's been some instances where a lot of those meetings have not been as productive as they could be. So people get scared off. I mean, I've been to meetings for events before, even as a paid consultant, and I've sat there for 3 hours. And these meetings have not been productive. So that can scare people away because they don't have time for that. So my recommendation is only at that executive tier. So if we go back here, these guys at the top, they can get together regularly. They can have their meetings. They can discuss higher macro level or strategic stuff. But don't waste the energy of these guys down here on coming to meetings. You definitely need a communication framework in place to keep up to date with where they're up to, but let them get on with the job and provide them with the checklist and the tools and the resources to be able to do the job. So just make sure you're really thinking through your process around meetings, because they can be big time wasters. They're essential for certain things, but we don't need to have those guys down in that micro level spending their time coming to meetings. And I'm just thinking, it's also important to note there, so a lot of people get concerned and they go, okay, well, how do I know where my bar coordinator's up to? And that's a genuine concern. So you do need, as I just said before, you need a communication system in place. And one way to do that is things like Facebook groups, or there's a program called Slack, which is a communication tool that you can use online. So have different online group chats that allow you to keep up to date with people and your different subcommittee coordinators. And when we get to talking about roles and responsibilities in a moment, you'll see there's an opportunity once you clearly articulate the tasks and the responsibilities for each of those subcommittee groups. You can actually note in that checklist, you know, providing a monthly update. So that could just be for them to give you a quick email. So don't be concerned that you're going to lose control or lose touch. That's something you need to try to deal with, because it's really important to empower people and make sure that you are allowing them to get on with the job. And also equipping them, as I said before, equipping them with clear roles and responsibilities so they know what's expected. Once again, this is in the template that I supplied for you. And this is, so before I talked about this idea of operating like a business and almost having job descriptions for all of the key subcommittee groups. This is an example. And this is probably one of the most important tasks in setting up a framework that will empower your volunteers and will ensure efficiencies. You're basically saying, here you go, now I want you to get on with the job. And it's pretty simple. It does take a bit of time, but it's simple. So once you've got your structure in place, once you've established your executive group, your subcommittee group, then what you need to do for each of those subcommittees, then you establish a roles and responsibilities checklist. And this is it. So this is the first page. You clearly articulate some aspects of the role, the title. If they have a budget, you can actually articulate what that budget is so they know that's what they've got to work within. You want to put a policy around, financial management, but once again, for certain roles, so for the bar coordinator, for example, they need to know what their budget is to purchase stock. These things here, file storage, this is where, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times now, having shared filing systems. So whether you use Google Drive or Dropbox or something of that nature, That's where you put the link to their folder. So that's where you want to encourage them to use that shared filing system. You want to get away from volunteers keeping everything on their personal computer, because when we're talking about succession planning, you don't want to lose any of that IP. You want to make sure you retain all of that. So you want to encourage all of your subcommittee groups or coordinators to be sharing any documentation in that online filing system. So if you put the link there, it's all done and easy for them. If they have a specific email address, so sometimes if you've got a stallholder coordinator, for example, they might have a specific email address, which is stallholder@lindasfestival.com. You won't have that for many people, but for some you may. So that's where you'd insert that. You insert a brief objective of the position. So, you know, what is it that you're wanting them to achieve? And then essentially you outline their duties and some timing around that. And this is an example. So pretty basic structure and format. It's just a table. You list all of their tasks and you give them a timeline. And this is where I was saying you can put in here, if you feel that it's going to help you, is you can put, you know, each month, you know, brief email update to coordinator so that they know that's expected of them. This then becomes their checklist. So if you imagine a volunteer, whether they're an existing volunteer or you're recruiting for a new volunteer, this quickly and clearly shows them what's expected of them. What's the actual job that you want me to do? What are the time frames around it? What are the specific tasks? Then someone can look at that and go, okay, yeah, I reckon I could do that. Or no, that's too much for me, or I'm not really comfortable or confident enough to deliver that for you. So it's being really open and transparent with volunteers or potential volunteers. So once you've got your team, once you've recruited all your new, young, fresh volunteers, you then need to retain them. How do you keep them motivated? Because it's really tiring when you've got that turnover every year. If you've got to retrain someone every year, whether it's a paid employee or a volunteer, it's still the same. You've got to train them. So if you can retain your volunteers for multiple years, then that's going to be not only good for you, but also really good and powerful for the event, because you start to get some traction. It can be hard when you've got a fresh person every year. So when you're recruiting for volunteers, it's something else to keep in mind is if you can ask them to perhaps commit for multiple years, 2 to 3 years, that would be ideal, but don't put that pressure on them if there's a risk of them saying no overall. So I'm going to talk to you now just briefly about empowering your team. I do believe that if you can empower the volunteers you have and they are more motivated, then you won't need as many volunteers. And I do think that less volunteers is better, because as you've got more and more volunteers, that's more and more time and energy to manage those volunteers. So delegation and empowerment, I've said it before, delegation and empowerment are critical to a successful event team and to a successful event. This is actually the Airbnb philosophy, and I think it's really relevant to event teams. If you think back to that snowflake structure, empower the community to manage itself. So think of that bar coordinator. You want to empower them to take ownership over managing the bar. And they're going to build their own community of family, friends, colleagues that are going to help them do the job. It is about building this community. You need to make sure that you've got the right people in the right place, and then you need to empower them to do the job that they've been assigned to do. And that actually leads to a more fulfilling volunteer experience. This is what we don't like to see. And this is what nobody likes to experience: micromanaging. You may have experienced this yourself, where you think, you know what, sometimes it's just easier to do it myself rather than brief someone else. And we have those thoughts, don't we? So time consuming trying to brief someone or train someone. But we need to change this, because volunteers don't like to feel like they're being spied on and everything they do is being checked, and feeling like they're not trusted. So we really need to make sure, if you do have that potential to be a bit of a micromanager, you need to really try to pull back from that. If you ask somebody to do something and you give them the roles and responsibilities, you can feel more comfortable knowing that you've briefed them fully, and then you need to trust them to get on and get the job done. So it's this whole idea of setting up event teams based on empowerment and ensuring there's robust systems and processes that allow them to get on with the job. So if you look at that toolkit that I gave you, that's essentially everything you need to go away and set this whole structure up for yourself. The second thing to that is to really know how to empower your team to get the most value and the most efficiency, the greatest efficiency out of them. I've been in this situation before. I know what it feels like to just think, oh my God, I'd rather do it myself. It's too hard to try to explain it to someone, but it can be stressful to be a micromanager. And you guys know this as well as me, if not better. There is so much detail in events. So much detail. And the closer you get to event day, the more stuff's coming in, right? That's when the sleepless nights start to come in. Oh, did I do that? Where's that up to? Oh my God, I've forgotten that. If you, as one person or maybe two people, have to think of everything, no joke, you're going to internally combust. You will. It's just this information overload. It's an awful feeling. So we need to empower, we need to delegate, we need to share the load. So how do you empower your team? If you can empower your volunteers and your team, your job's going to become much easier. So just think about that. If you do start to fall into that mindset of, oh, this is just easier to do myself, tell yourself, no, it's not. If I can just empower these guys and give them the checklist and everything that they need, it's going to make it easier for me. So here are a few practical ways you can empower your team. Passion equals position. Basically, what we're saying here is what really motivates a volunteer should actually mirror the roles and responsibilities that you assign to them. So if you've got somebody in your community that is good at accounting or enjoys working with numbers, then they might be good for your finance committee. So you want to match up passions with what people want to do. If you've got someone in your community that, you know, is a keen runner or loves fitness, then maybe they're going to coordinate your fun run. So you see what I mean? It's finding people, and once you know what those roles are, you can be targeted. You can target people in the community that you feel are the right fit for those different positions. I've said this a few times now, be very clear about what needs to be done, how long it's going to take, and what the deadline is. So that's where the roles and responsibilities come in. You need to respect that everybody has a lot of stuff going on in their life. So be upfront with expectations around the volunteer role. Let them get on with the job. So you don't actually want to go into minutiae detail of telling them how to do the job. Just paint the picture of what success looks like, give them the roles and responsibilities document, and then get out of their way and let them get on with the job. Consistent communication is really important. Communicate with them regularly and make sure communication is different and separate from general information about the event. So if you're sending out newsletters or social media posts to attendees, don't think that that's just enough for your volunteers to receive as well. You want to treat them like special insiders. And I'm going to share with you a bit of an initiative from Woodford Folk Festival shortly, which touches on this, is, you know, treating them like they're special. They're part of a VIP club. That's, cult is a really powerful word, and I'm not suggesting you're creating a cult, but it's that sense of we're part of this community. You need to listen, and you need to offer opportunities to provide feedback. So people love to feel heard. So give your volunteers an opportunity to make suggestions, to give ideas on how to improve particular elements of the event. So this is where having debrief meetings, surveying your volunteers, having focus group sessions, just inviting them to have input often is really good way to empower your volunteers. Always making sure you have thorough briefing and giving them the resources that they need is really important. So this is this whole idea of being clear about expectations. So although you've briefed them on the planning stages with your roles and responsibilities, when it's getting closer to event day, you want to have briefing sessions with them. Okay, here's what we expect. Here's the run sheet. Here's the plan of attack, whatever it is, so that everybody is very clear on how it's going to unfold. Give them meaningful tasks. You know, sometimes we think of volunteers, or maybe we've got some high school students or uni students. Some people will fall into the trap of going, oh, we'll just give them the crappy jobs. You know, they can be the toilet cleaners, or they can just do, you know, folding napkins all day. For example, I know someone's got to do that job, right? But don't just fall into the trap of giving that to the volunteers. Always try to find some meaningful work, or to make every role meaningful. Say thank you seems so simple, right? But by recognizing their efforts, you're actually making a difference. So really show your appreciation. If you can, you know, send them a little personalized note, give them your time and just listen to them. You might want to do things like create volunteer awards program, or throw a party for them. And also another good thing is just doing a social media shout out. And even if you can, you know, you might notice a little thing that a volunteer does to help somebody at the event. Go and thank them for that. Just acknowledge them. But make sure that it's personal and intentional. It's really empowering for volunteers. And finally, just let go. So if you have a bit of that controlling personality or management style, empowering others is probably not your natural default. But in this situation, you need to let go, and giving up some control is healthy for everybody involved. So show trust and you will benefit in the long run. Look, I'll just go through this quickly. I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing you on this, but how to disempower your team. So these are things you want to be really mindful of staying away from. And I'm sure all of you would be fine, but it's still important to point this out. So these are the things that volunteers often get upset about. And you know what? Once you've lost a volunteer because they've not been treated right, it's really hard to get them back, or impossible. So volunteers feel disempowered if they get the blame for things that weren't of their doing, or when colleagues may take the credit for work that they did. Nobody loves to be publicly humiliated for something. And when we say publicly, that could just be in front of one person. It could be in front of a whole team, or it could be in front of the whole committee. So always be mindful. If someone's made a mistake and you need to address that, make sure you're really sensitive about how you go about that. As we've talked about, micromanaging, that's a really good way to turn your volunteers away. Don't play favourites, you know, particularly in events, because we often have family, friends, colleagues that are working and volunteering with us. It's really important to make sure that you're not showing any special treatment. People don't like it when there's a lack of trust. People don't like if they have to follow overly prescriptive processes, or if they need to get what they see as unnecessary approvals to perform any piece of work. So it's kind of like micromanaging. It's unnecessary time and energy. They don't like unrealistic deadlines. And they don't like to be treated as a resource, or we don't like to be treated as a resource. So remembering they're a human and they've got, you know, sensitive emotions as well. So as I said, I don't want to dwell on those things, but it's important to really be mindful of, you know, we're dealing with people. And some of these things will hopefully come naturally to you in terms of how to empower your team, or staying away from these things that disempower them. And that's great. But when we're talking about recruiting volunteers, getting new volunteers, it's really important to be mindful of these things. Now, has anyone heard of this commitment curve? I always refer to this when I think of volunteer recruitment and management, because I think it's a really interesting approach or strategy for volunteer recruitment. Basically what it is this commitment curve is where you start with a very small or soft commitment, and then you gradually ask that volunteer or that person for increased commitment as you move them up the commitment curve. So let me give you an example with an event. So they may start doing just a couple of hours at the event, selling tickets at the gate. So that's that kind of discovery phase, right? That you've just got them in, it's a bit of a soft introduction. And then they're like, oh, this is a great event. Oh, it's great people. You know, I feel really cool being part of this team of volunteers delivering this great event. So then you may invite them to the post-event review and a social function following the event. So you're moving them up the board. So you got them from discovering to onboarding and engagement to eventually having them up where they're actually leading one of those subcommittee groups, or they're on the executive group. So I want you to think about that when you're recruiting people. Who's already on board that can move up the commitment curve? Or can you get new people on board at the event to just give them a taste, get them involved in the event, show them what the experience is like, with the view that potentially you could move them up the curve as well? And this is really good when we talk about succession planning, because you slowly, if you imagine you're bringing people in on event day to get a taste for it, and then you're moving them through this commitment curve to go, okay, well, we gradually train them and transition them up the curve to become coordinators or executive position holders. And you can have people in those other roles training them along the way as well. You might be able to think right now of some people that are on board with your committee that you could potentially move up the board. It's easier to actually recruit someone just to do a couple of hours selling tickets at the gate than it is to recruit someone to be the coordinator of the bar. It's just an easier sell. So just keep that in mind if you're having a bit of trouble trying to recruit your volunteers. So I said a little earlier around the Woodford Folk Festival, and I showed you their organisational chart, which is just mind-blowing. This event is an absolutely perfect example of how to create an empowered team. They have hundreds of volunteers. I think from memory, it was like 400 and something volunteers at that event each year. They actually turn people away from volunteering. So they've got a robust application process and they turn people away each year. They've built that festival on empowerment. It's an amazing case study. If anyone ever wants to chat with what they call that particular role, the citizenship coordinator, I'm happy to connect you because their story is so inspiring. And I think we can all learn a lot from how they've done it. Yeah, look, granted, they're quite a big festival now, but even when you look at their model, it could easily be replicated for a small event. So they've now gone as far as creating this citizenship. So they call it the Woodfordia citizenship. It's all about good times, contribution, and a sense of belonging. And people actually pay now. So you can actually pay to be part of the club. I think it's like $30-something a year. And you get to be involved in projects all year. You get personal invitations. You get access to a portal with behind the scenes interviews and audios and all this other exciting stuff. So they've actually got to a point where they've put so much time and energy and effort into empowering people that they've now created this desire amongst people that can align to their values to be part of this community. And I'm just going to share with you, if you have never been to Woodford, I just want to share this with you because I think it's the feeling of the festival as well. You can almost feel this sense of community and also the language they use.
Let it breathe, if it doesn't breathe, it's gonna die. Let it see, if we let it be, is it gonna fly? Set it free, and if it leaves, we say goodbye. Where we weave, and then we grieve, and then we cry. I wanna tell you before I forget, you're doing well, you know you're living it. You're gonna make it no matter how hard it gets. Despite the darkness, some of these days, winter green, we can't outshine your radiance. Winter green, we'll undermine your salience. Winter green, I love you more than anything. Winter green, despite the darkness, some of these days. Despite the darkness, some of these days, winter green, it can't outshine your radiance. Winter green, run remind your salience. Winter green, I love you more than anything. Winter green, despite the darkness, some of these days.
That's It's such a good video. I can just watch that all day. I get goosebumps watching that. I think as well, because I am so hanging to go to a festival, you know, and with 12 months of pretty much nothing, I think a lot of us are keen to get back into it. But you can see just the feeling that gives you. And once again, like I'm saying, sometimes we can't compare to the size or scale, but we can still learn from these events. You know, the systems and the processes they've put in place and they've had to put in place to get to the position they're currently in is certainly things that we can learn from. They wouldn't be able to manage that event without a really robust volunteer program. 400 plus volunteers to actually deliver that event, and they obviously have paid staff and a board of management, so it's, you know, a completely different scale to many of the events that we're talking with today. But it's so inspiring to just see that, you know, people do volunteer, people will volunteer, but we need to find those motivations. We need to understand how to connect with people. I'm really keen, so I've got a bit to go. Maybe another half an hour or so of content that I want to share with you. But I just want you to take 5 minutes now just to have a quick think about your event. I'm happy for you to share it. If anyone wants to unmute or share something in the chat box, or just take some notes quietly. Based on what I've just shared with you, what do you think you can do to change or to do better to empower your team? And think about recruitment, think about roles and responsibilities. What are the things you're going to go away from today and implement to make your job easier and to assist in that recruitment and retention of your volunteers? While you're doing that, I'm just going to jump into the chat box because I see a few notifications and see if there's anything that needs to be addressed. Yeah, good one, Sophie. Definitely giving them ownership. It seems so obvious, right, doesn't it? When you go put in place defined roles. I mean, if we were running a business, we have to do that. We have to be very clear in terms of our expectations and requirements for a staff member. So it's almost like going, okay, we need to just think or stop thinking that volunteering is different to a paid position and treat them kind of the same. And having those defined roles, it seriously is a game changer for events. And I'd be really interested to hear how it goes for you. And another example is, you may be familiar with the Gameri Pumpkin Festival. That's a festival not far from Gympie. It's a tiny little rural community, like of a few hundred people, and they attract like 17,000 people to this festival, Gameri Pumpkin Festival. I've worked with them on and off over the last few years, and one of their biggest challenges has always been around getting people on the core committee. So Desley, you said you have a lot of trouble getting people on your core committee. This was the same with Gameri Pumpkin Festival. They were at the point where they said to me, this is it, right? We've got our AGM in, say, 3 months, I think it was. If we can't fill the required positions at the AGM, the festival's done. Like that, 17,000 people come to that festival. The amount of economic return the businesses get is unheard of. It's ridiculous. So for them to lose that festival would be absolutely disastrous. But they were prepared to do that because there was 1 or 2 people that were doing everything and they couldn't continue that way. So I worked with them to actually develop their roles and responsibilities. We went through this process, this exact process that I'm talking through with you today. We went through that. They went into their AGM. They'd already promoted what are the roles we need, and they had clear checklists for everybody. They had the most people ever turn up to their AGM, and they filled every single position. I'm not suggesting everybody will have that success, and there may have been other things that impacted on that. Maybe because people heard that it was, it was a make or break for the event. That I'm sure would have helped, but everybody felt so comfortable to actually take on a role because they knew what was expected of them. And I'm happy to connect you with Gameri Pumpkin Festival if anyone wants to talk to them about their experience, because it certainly was a great case study. I'll just give you another minute in case anyone's writing their own notes. All right. So I'm just going to wrap up today with a few slides around recruitment tips. And we're also going to talk a little bit about volunteer burnout. So I've touched, I guess where I've been to so far is given the bigger picture of, how to set up a good structure, how to understand motivations, and how to empower your team. So you now have that kind of appreciation, I guess, of what needs to be done. You all know that you're going to go away and set up the structure, your roles and responsibilities, and that's going to give you an excellent framework to start with recruitment. You also need to know what your volunteers expect. So we talked about motivations, and that's quite different to expectations. What do they want in return? And I guess that links somewhat to motivation, because if you understand what motivates them, you'll be able to better understand what expectations they have. And it's important also to remember that not everyone wants to be involved in the planning stages. Then you have some that will only want to be involved in the planning stages and not get their hands dirty on event day. Some only want to fulfill a specific role on the day and they don't expect to go to meetings, as I've talked about. And then you'll have others that want as much communication as possible. They want to go to as many meetings and they want to be kept well informed, but they don't want to do much of the doing. So it's really important when you're starting this recruitment phase and you know what your roles are and you start having conversations with people, ask them what they want. How do they want it to work for them? You need to understand their motives. You need to understand what expectations they have. Another thing I want you to do is to think about creating a volunteer management policy, or at least some kind of framework, so that it's very clear up front what your volunteers get and what is expected in return. So it's kind of like a partnership agreement. And I always suggest to events that you have a blanket policy for all volunteers. And we often have this conversation with events where they'll say, you know, should all of our volunteers get free tickets? Are we expected to feed them on the day? You know, how does that work? And what if one person puts in 5 hours, but someone else puts in 500 hours? How do you make that all fair? They're all questions you need to address, and you need to clearly articulate it in some kind of policy that is very transparent and all volunteers can see and understand and appreciate, because otherwise it can get messy. You also need to make sure that you have a system set up for volunteer sign-ups, so you can set really clear expectations with the volunteer up front. So that's where you might have, you know, a sign-up form. They get to view the policy, they see the roles and responsibilities, they can have a quick discussion with you. So really have a system in place for that sign-up or recruitment process. So it's all about being clear, transparent, and understanding expectations from both parties. It's kind of, I guess, like it's almost like a sponsorship or a partnership agreement. You know what you want as an event, but you need to understand what they want in return. And it's not about creating individual agreements with all volunteers, because that'd be an absolute nightmare to manage. But it's about having those discussions and knowing where that middle ground is. So here are a few recruitment tips. And like I said at the start, and as we've discussed in the first part of this session, the two things you need to do before you start recruiting are define your clear roles. So get those roles and responsibilities established and know what your value proposition is. Why should I spend my free time volunteering at your event? You want to be able to answer that question before you go and chat to people. So you ask people you know. That's always where we start, right? Our uncles, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, our mums. People like being asked, and they're more likely to say yes if they know the person that's asking them. So get everybody on your current committee to spread the word and try to recruit people they know. Another thing you can do is ask your volunteers to bring a friend, especially anyone that might be a good fit for the job. You don't just want a whole heap of volunteers that aren't skilled in the right areas to be able to fill positions, because that becomes challenging to manage as well. But if there's people that could be a good fit for a particular job or responsibility, make sure you get your volunteers to bring those friends along. You can ask your volunteers to promote their volunteering at your event through their own social media networks. So get them to celebrate the fact that they're volunteering at your event. Create some FOMO. Social media is a good channel to do recruitment. You can reach out and ask for volunteers through your social media channels or through other relevant groups. You can do this through Facebook, or there's LinkedIn groups as well that might overlap with the theme of your event. Get out and about around the town. So set up an information booth for the organisation or the event. You might go to the farmers market. So it's really about raising awareness. And that might be just, you know, getting people on a mailing list of interested volunteers. It may not be signing them up on the spot, but you might be able to get a mailing list of interested volunteers, and you can then do some targeted recruitment down the track. You want to maximise your volunteer webpage. So what I mean by this is, instead of just listing opportunities, so we need volunteers for this role and this role, instead of just listing all of those on your website, use it as a way to engage your potential volunteer community and your existing volunteer community. So you can actually invite existing volunteers to post their pictures and videos and stories. You can share your photos and videos from past events. You can link to your online sign-up form. You can have blog posts. You can share a whole heap of stuff from existing volunteers through your social media and on your webpage. Once again, it's kind of creating that FOMO, right? We see what our friends are doing, volunteering at events, and going, oh, how could I get involved in that? That looks like fun. I'd love to do that. That sits well with, you know, my values and purpose. There's also things like, if you haven't yet looked them up, look at things like Go Volunteer and Seek Volunteer. So you can actually register with them and you can list your volunteering positions. So that's a really practical way to do it. There's also a thing called Volunteer Match. So that's free for nonprofits. So you can actually, once again, post up volunteering opportunities and they can match you with volunteers. Because the other thing is, you know, there's opportunity not only recruit volunteers from your local community. So you could actually recruit volunteers, you know, that live across the other side of the country or another part of the world that can do what we refer to as voluntourism. So they actually come to your event as a volunteer tourist. There's lots of great events that do that. One that comes to mind, they do it really well, is Big Red Bash in Birdsville. So they obviously don't have a big volunteer base at Birdsville to draw on. So they have a fantastic volunteer program where they give free tickets and I think some camping to their volunteers, but they've got a really rigorous program around it with training and expectations, etc. If you want to have a look, all of that's on their website. You can have a look at how they recruit their volunteers and the paperwork, etc. It's a really good example of voluntourism. But the Grey Nomads as well. So there's the Grey Nomads is actually a magazine and a website. So you can actually send them a short paragraph about your event. So you can talk to them about dates, etc. and they'll actually post it on their website. So that's the greynomads.com.au. Once again, if you've got the potential to attract tourists as volunteers. There's volunteering state bodies. That's a free service for nonprofits. So you can look into that, Volunteering Queensland. The other thing is, and a lot of events do already do this, you know, accessing university, TAFE and high school students, especially if you've got students in a course on event management, tourism or hospitality, or any field that's related to festivals. It could be arts, sport, anything related to your event. So once again, these people that want to further their career or get that practical experience. Service clubs and local nonprofits are really handy to tap into. So think about all of the different groups or nonprofits in your community and see if you can have some kind of partnership arrangement with them. You know, they might come and coordinate an aspect of your event. So, you know, you often see Rotary or Lions Club, they'll actually manage, you know, car parking areas or traffic management, or they'll manage the gate in return for a donation back to their club. And that's a good way to actually delegate a whole area of your event or a whole area of responsibility to another organisation. And it's also supporting your local community. You can definitely broadcast via local media, radio stations, newspapers about your volunteer opportunities. Don't also forget to connect with your council or your regional tourism organisation. Sometimes they'll have a database of volunteers and also other events. So all of your events in your region, you guys should be talking to one another and looking at how you can cross-promote volunteering opportunities or maybe share volunteers. I mean, we don't want to burn out a small group of volunteers, but if there's people that are volunteering at the show that may have an interest in volunteering at another event, then, you know, it might be worth looking at those cross-promotional opportunities. And remember, it's not always about mass recruitment. So the biggest tip I have for you is to start thinking of it as a really targeted approach. So rather than going out and saying, we need events for the St. George show, think about what positions you need to fill and target some people in your community that you think may have the capacity and the skills to actually deliver that role. How do you deal with burnout? It's one of the biggest challenges with events because they are labour intensive. And if we don't have enough volunteers and we aren't structured efficiently enough, we start to see burnout. And we need to be really mindful of it so that we can prevent it. And it's often the case when there's a few people trying to take the load. Remember what I said, empowerment and delegation. They are your best friends. So how do we prevent this exhaustion? How do we actually prevent people, not wanting to come back the following year? There's a number of quick tips here for you in terms of beating volunteer burnout. You can recruit teams rather than individuals. So as I said before with the Lions Club example, recruit the team to actually deliver that aspect of the event. So sharing the volunteer load with a team is going to lighten the load for everybody. Create holidays. Paid workers get holidays. Why not volunteers? So force your volunteers. If you've got somebody that commits all year to your event as a volunteer, make them take some time off where they're not allowed to think about the event, not allowed to talk about it. Organise tactically. So tactics are short-term tasks. So that's that whole concept of where I was saying break it down into manageable chunks. Think tactically about the things that need to be done. Always reconnect to purpose. Your volunteers want to know what difference they're making. So if they understand the purpose of what they're doing and the power of what they're doing in terms of the bigger benefit of the event to the community, to the local economy, then that's really helpful. You also want to debrief, particularly if they're emotionally draining roles, but having that debrief time so volunteers can debrief, they can download everything, get it out of their head, not feel that pressure. Sometimes it's the pressure of just feeling like we've got so much in our head that's hard and can cause burnout. So let them get that out. You also want to provide a volunteer break room, escape, a cave, whatever you want to call it. So at the event, make sure that you have a room, volunteers only, where they can go and relax, retreat. They can, chat together. It's really a special place for your volunteers. And stock it with some good snacks, tea, coffee, water, lollies, whatever it is that keeps them happy. You need to remember that every volunteer is unique. And this is really important. Some are able to handle large amounts of work and won't burn out, but others can't carry a real heavy load. So you've got to be aware of tolerance levels for your volunteers and make sure that you're managing workload accordingly. Because the problem is if we get to a point where volunteers are starting to feel like they're getting exhausted or burnt out, as we've seen on the slide just before, they won't come back. And this is what we're trying to avoid. We want to retain our volunteers. So we want them to do enough so they feel like they're having an impact, but not so much that they're totally exhausted at the end. And it's a bit of a balancing act. You need to resist the last minute surprises. Those situations where it's like, by the way, can you also just do this for me? Really be careful of that, because that just adds to the load. If you've already given a volunteer their roles and responsibilities, their expectation is that that's what I'm doing. If you're going to constantly contact them and go, oh, by the way, can you also do this? And can you also do this? You're going to overwhelm them and they will burn out in a matter of time. So be really careful of that. And that's why having those roles and responsibilities up front is really important. And if you do have things that come up, because you will, it's the nature of events, just talk to the volunteers beforehand and say, look, you know, there's little bits and pieces that keep coming up as extra things to be done. How would you feel about me throwing you a couple of, you know, small extra jobs over the next few weeks? And probably the most important thing is to remember that volunteers often have other jobs and or a life outside of the event, believe it or not. And usually our best volunteers, and you guys may find this as well, usually the best volunteers are involved in multiple organisations. So they're spreading themselves and they'll continue to take stuff on. They're the ones that are more likely to overload and head towards burnout. So you need to be really mindful of that. Know that they've got other things going on. You need to take these steps to make sure that you don't lose your best volunteers, because we want to retain them. It's easier to keep an existing volunteer than it is to recruit and train another one. And that's everything I have to share with you today. So I'd like to open up if anybody has anything they would like to discuss before we wrap up, or if you've got any questions. I have to apologise for that background noise. I'm in a meeting room at the library, and there's somebody that's just come into the meeting room next door with a squealing child, which is not real pleasant, to be honest. If anyone wants to unmute, ask any questions, share any thoughts, please do so now. And in the meantime, I'm just going to have a look in our chat box. Okay, the screaming child is leaving. That's better. My apologies. I thought this would be a good, quiet place to work today. Okay. Yeah, Desley, food and wine always works a treat.
And a public place, not somebody's house, always works too. People don't feel funny going to someone's house where, like they feel funny going to someone's house, where if it's at least a public place, you know, there's a destination and it's not someone's house. That's what we've found here too.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of events, you know, I'm just thinking of events that I've attended meetings for, they tend to be at someone's house. And you're right, it just doesn't feel as, I don't know.
Formal. I don't know either what it is, but yeah.
Linda, yeah, it's Desley again. This time, the AGM, we failed to get a quorum, as I said, and this time we made it a more casual affair. It was come along, have some wine and cheese, and we'll talk about our event. Oh, and by the way, we just need to ratify the positions. We've got the executive. We just need to ratify the positions at the AGM. So we got 11 people turn up, and at the first try, we only had we were struggling to get a quorum, and then at the last minute, one lady's child got sick, so we didn't have a quorum, and the quorum is 7 for our AGM. So we had 11 at the one at the winery, so that was good, and every position, you know, on the management committee as well was filled. The executive was pre-filled, and so yeah, it was a lot more successful. I agree with what Susie says. At people's houses, people might feel a bit funny.
That's a really good result. Desley. So do you think the reason for that was it was at a winery, it wasn't at somebody's personal residence? Was there anything else you did? Was there anything else you did to get that 11 turn up at your AGM?
We asked the people that were at the first try to bring a friend, and they started to think about the keen ones. I'm talking about the ones that were there were obviously keen and committed, but they did bring a friend, and that worked as well because the friends were interested. They'd sort of heard about it, and now they've joined up and are interested. And we've got a couple of very, excellent potential members. And as you say, to break down the roles and responsibilities, these people are skilled in different areas. So yeah, it's going to be a wider field to pick from.
Fantastic. The good old invite a friend. Has anyone got anything else that they would like to discuss this afternoon?
Linda, it's Desley again. Vis-a-vis the social media and image reproduction, how official do you have to be about your volunteers signing forms for image consent and use of images, all that sort of thing? Is there some process that you should go through, or do you ask people when you take photos, or how do you recommend?
Look, yeah, there is. You definitely do need to get approval to use photos, which can make it challenging at times. So what I suggest to events is try to do a blanket approval with your volunteers. So anyone that's involved in the event, if you've got, some events will have like a sign up form for volunteers. They have to complete some kind of membership form or some paperwork that, means that they're covered with insurance, etc. I suggest you do it as part of that. So you actually just have another section on that just says, by signing this form, you are allowing us to use any images of you for marketing purposes for the event. There's some wording. Find some wording around that, but that's a way to get around it, and then it's covered. So if you're taking any photos of volunteers, they've all given approval for that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
If someone says no, they're not happy to be part in any photos, then it becomes a bit harder, because you've just got to be careful of what photos you take and who's in those group photos. But hopefully no one, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. As long as you explain they're only for marketing purposes, you're not going to go crazy putting, photos up everywhere, then most people are fairly comfortable with that.
Yeah, I found that when you ask people, but I just thought whether, we should be protected by having something in writing. But on the sign-up form, that sounds a great idea, yeah.
Just try to do it in one go, because if you have to actually get, permission every photo you take, are you okay for us to sign this? And some professional photographers need to do that, and they'll have waiver forms if you ever work with professional photographers. But in your case, I would just do it as part of that sign-up process.
Yeah, and we've still got a few volunteers, as you say, the ones that are sort of willing to help on the day but not wanting to commit to committees, etc., not wanting to go to meetings. But for incorporation purposes, I thought that if they were going to help on the day, they have to be members anyway to be covered by whatever indemnity we are covered by. If we take out a policy for the event, or if we're under the umbrella organisation that we're hiring the venue from under their indemnity, then the individuals would have to be members. But how do you encourage people to pay the $20 membership, which we've got per year, when they don't want to be involved in meetings or anything official?
Yeah, I would chat to your insurance company about that, because there's definitely ways around that. I know what you mean. Like, if it also makes the sales pitch a bit harder too, doesn't it? It's like you're trying to encourage people to volunteer, but then you say, oh, and by the way, you've got to pay us $20 to be a member. Talk to your insurance company, because I know that some insurance companies will do like a umbrella kind of volunteer cover. So they'll go, oh, this event has XYZ number of volunteers. And as long as a volunteer has filled out some kind of sign up form or something to say that they're volunteering, or it could even be the sign-on sheet at the event. You know, you've got to have a record of them being at your event and volunteering, then that will cover them in any, you know, incident that may occur. But what I suggest you do is talk to your insurance company about that, because you're right. And particularly if somebody just wants to help for a few hours at the event, they need to be covered, particularly with liability and that type of thing. But you don't necessarily need them or want to even ask them to have to pay some form of membership fee.
Okay, no, that's sensible. Yeah, that sounds very logical, because if they're not going to be doing anything, if they're not going to be attending meetings, they're not going to twist their ankle on someone's deck.
Exactly.
Like that.
Yeah.
The show just have on their insurance, just we pay extra premium just for our volunteers. So that means they don't have to be a member. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a volunteer workers policy, Susie?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Desley, I would just ring and have a chat to your insurance company.
Yep.
And see what they advise.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. If anyone has any other questions, please make sure you join us in the Facebook group or the Facebook event. For those of you that haven't yet seen, I also have a Facebook group called Regional Events Hub. So that's a public group on Facebook, and we have people that work in events all over Australia. Some of them are in local government. Many of them are like yourselves, working with volunteer committees and delivering events in regional communities. And it's basically just somewhere that we go to share information. If anyone has questions or anything like that, they usually use that Facebook group as an opportunity to gather information. So you're more than welcome to join that if you are interested. Otherwise, we also have the Facebook event, which is for the Balonne Shire. So please make sure you use that. But otherwise, I'll see you next week. So next week, we're talking about events in a COVID world. So what I'll be doing is sharing with you some things that you need to think about moving forward, because it is a bit of a different environment. It's, you know, we're still a little bit unsure in terms of what the long-term impact will be on the events industry and the obligations for event organisers. But basically, I'm going to share with you some inspiration around how some events have adapted to be COVID safe. And we're also going to look at COVID safe planning. So talk a bit more about, you know, the practical elements that you now need to consider for your event in order for it to be COVID safe. So if you've got any specific questions around any of that, make sure you bring them with you next week. Or if there's anything in particular you want me to address in that session, let me know. Flick me an email and say, look, these are some of the areas that concern me around being COVID safe. And I'm happy to address those for you. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon. And I will see you all same time next week.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.